What does Bidenomics mean?
Well, I think it's a collection of all the things he's done. And it's the White House's effort to package the president's economic record as something that voters might like. And as far as I can tell, essentially it's a pro-interventionist, bigger government set of policies. And that includes, by the way, migrating into industrial policy in the form of the CHIPS Act, which is something that I think the president's very proud of. It got bipartisan support in the Congress. So it's a combination of different things. But really what it is, I think, is an effort to sell his economic record ahead of an election where voters may have some questions about exactly what his economic record has been. And their memory of the economic record is last year's recession, inflation, excuse me, and a possible recession to come.
Okay, so that said, he's trying to get into people's living rooms here. This is a campaign-style event in Chicago tomorrow. Bidenomics, it's got a brand. People are having trouble defining it, although you just took a swing at it there. But when you're dealing with approval ratings in the 30s or low 40s, as he is it because the subject matter is a little too esoteric for the living room? You just pointed out the CHIPS Act. Who's talking about that over dinner?
I think they're banking on the economy remaining relatively strong. They're banking on there not being a recession. They're banking on the soft landing. There's a lot of things that they're hoping for. And I think their view is that most voters will vote their pocketbooks. And I think if you look at recent elections, that ends up being the case most of the time. So if you think voters are going to be voting their pocketbooks, then you better make a case that the president is doing a good job on the economic issue. So I think this is an effort to reframe the election on terms that they believe are favorable.
But when consumers, Americans, go to the voting booths and you say, as Joe's point, no one's at their dinner table talking about the CHIPS Act.
Right.
All of this infrastructure that they're trying to do, or how Janet Yellen would describe, expand the productive capacity of the United States, that's not going to be felt by November of next year.
It's not going to be felt, but I think they can always make the case that they're responsible for whatever positive measures we're seeing in the economy. So, for example, the robust job creation that we've seen over the last several months, by and large, that's something they're going to try and claim credit for. And so even if for most Americans they're not talking about the CHIPS Act, the administration will talk about it in terms of we've created jobs, we've created a positive economic environment, we're bringing jobs back to America, we're countering perceived economic coercion by China. These are the kinds of themes the White House wants to focus on, in part because they believe that they will sell with voters. And they don't have to be esoteric. They can try and bring them to as relatable of a place as they can.
Some of this stuff is out of the president's hands as the White House defers to the Federal Reserve on the issue of inflation. I know they've taken a couple swings at this, but this appears to be in the hands of Jay Powell. There's a question about whether he's going to have to smash the job market to win the war on inflation. And if he does, will it coincide with the throes of this re-election campaign?
The toughest thing for any president and for any re-election campaign is recognizing that so much is really out of your control. And so they're making a bet. They're making a bet that Powell can do just well enough that voters are going to assess the economic record positively, that the president's going to benefit from it. Now, there's a risk that that goes south, and everyone understands and recognizes that. But the alternative is the risk that the president doesn't get credit for the policy things that he really feels he should get credit for. And some of this might be driven by the president himself, wanting to feel like he can market some of what his administration has done. And that's a natural thing. Politicians want to be able to speak positively about the things they've done. And so I think some of this is the push and pull of trying to have a campaign theme, trying to ride the wave they believe will be there, and some of what the candidate himself wants.
Also what they learned from the past. There's been a lot of criticism within the Democratic Party that Obama didn't go out on the road enough and explain and sell Obamacare. You know, Joe brings up Jay Powell in the Federal Reserve. Shouldn't this administration, when everyone brings up inflation, be bashing or criticizing the Fed chair, saying that is up to the Federal Reserve and they were potentially, what many critics say, behind?
I think to come back to the point about what people sort of see and understand on a daily basis, the Fed is not an institution most people pay attention to. Bloomberg viewers pay attention to.
We do.
But you do. But I would say most voters are talking about, frankly, what do we think the president's responsibility is and not for the economy? And so even if the goal were to deflect blame, as president, the buck stops with the president. And so I don't think it's an effective strategy for the president or for anyone in the White House, for that matter, to say, well, that's Jay Powell's problem. First of all, no one knows who Jay Powell is. And second of all, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Voters are going to blame the president or they're going to give the president credit. That's how American politics works.
Contrarian view, and people should know you were policy director of the Romney-Ryan campaign. Going back to George H.W. Bush, with 90-something% approval ratings. Imagine that today, but being toppled when the economy went into recession, or at least the perception of a weak economy. This president is already in the 30s. If we have a recession next year, does it even matter?
Yeah, you know, the macro drives a lot of the outcome, and his numbers are weak going into this part of the cycle. If we do hit a recessionary period and people are really feeling it, I do think he's toast. I mean, it almost doesn't matter who the Republicans run in some ways. It's a set of circumstances Donald Trump is very excited about. But frankly, at the end of the day, the macro conditions are going to drive a lot of how people see this president. And so much of this, unfortunately, for the White House is going to be out of their control.